This is Ask Joe number
192.
Hello, hello, hello. Joe Gilder here from Home Studio Corner. Joe Gilder Music is my handle all over the interwebs, Twitter, Facebook. I hope you'll join me and come hang out. If you're here live, hey live people, thanks for hanging out live. I do this every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Central Time, so if and you can ever make it, I'd love to have you here. We hang out, answer questions about you and audio and recording and all sorts of good things. I'm shooting this. This is coming out on the 31st of January, 2017. Tomorrow is February, which is EP month for me. So if you're a VIP member, you got an email from me this morning. I'll send more information as we go. All about this EP challenge that I'm giving myself. I'm going to release 4 EPs this year. One in February, one in May, one in August, and one in November. However, I think that's the right. They're spaced out evenly. And yeah, I'm super excited. It's going to be fun. There have been some dramatic developments already. My drummer buddy that always plays on my stuff is too good for me. I'm kidding. He's not too good for me. He is booked with gigs and tours and essentially is unavailable for the first 2/3 of the month. So if I want to do a full band project, which I do, because I've already written some songs that need full band behind them, I'm gonna have to figure that out, which means probably another drummer, which is it'll be fun to do something different. Probably gonna record it here instead of at Tim's place. So if you're not a VIP member, homestudiocorner.com/VIP, check that out. It's $10 a month. You get access to a huge backlog of videos and mixed critiques and material that I've done I've been doing Home Studio Corner for almost 8 years now. So I've been doing VIP for at least 5 of those. So there's a lot of good stuff there to help you. I hear something. There's like something in my... It sounds like there's something walking around on the... That's not good. Let's not think about that. Something's tapping the window. I don't know what that is. It's crazy. The other night I was doing a live Q&A, and my cat ended up on the roof of the studio and jumped down. Anyway, it was funny. Okay, so I want to talk about really quickly. I think I may have mentioned this in last week's episode. If I did, forgive me. I'm going to repeat it, but it's one of those things that even if I did mention it, it's probably still worth repeating, so I'm going to repeat it. When I was out at NAMM, the NAMM show, I went to, if you're familiar with Dave Pensato's Place, of course you are. They did Pensato's Place live several days at the Avid booth, and so I made sure to attend those. And the very first day, they were interviewing Jimmy Douglas, and I know I mentioned him. I don't know if I mentioned this particular thing, but Jimmy has worked. He's been around forever, and he's worked with everyone from currently things like Justin Timberlake and Timbaland, however you say it, and but he's also done work with like Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones, like legitimately the whole spectrum of music. But he said something when someone asked him. They said we had a Q&A time with the audience, kind of so not unlike what we're doing right now, except I'm not Jimmy Douglas. And someone asked, "Has there ever been a situation where you've been nervous heading into the recording studio?" And he thought about it. He said, "No, I'm not really ever nervous. There's always a little bit of butterflies on the first day of a new project or something." But something he said, and he kind of just glossed over it, and it really stuck with me, was, "I always believe that the worst thing I could do is fail." Say that again. He said, "The worst thing I can do is fail." And that just hit me like a ton of bricks because of my own fears and insecurities when it comes to making music and doing things, but also just I feel like that is such a prevalent common theme among my Home Studio Corner folks and musicians in general. We have this huge fear of messing things up, we put off working on something because we might fail at it, as if failure is this big, awful thing. But as my old friend, he's not really my friend, but Zig Ziglar, the motivational speaker, we grew up in the same small town in Mississippi, so that's why I feel like I should call him my friend, even though we never met. He used to say, failure is an event, not a person. Meaning failure is just a thing that happened. It doesn't define who you are. So I don't want to get all like woo-woo motivational speaker, but when he said the worst I could do is fail, it felt liberating to me. It felt like he gave me permission to fail. And if you have permission to fail and you only see failure as just one of the options of things that could happen, this record could sound good or could sound bad. And if you're really okay with either, obviously you want everything to sound good. You don't want to fail, but failure is a legit option and it can certainly happen, and that's okay because you just move on to the next one and you go for a better recording, a better mix, a better song, and it can be a motivator too. So if you're like me and you tend to shy away from things sometimes because you're afraid you're not going to do them well, I would say kind of a theme for me this year is to, when I find myself feeling like I'm pushing away from something and feeling uncomfortable, I'm going to push into it instead. And if I find myself really not wanting to do something, that's a red flag that I really need to do it. I would encourage you to do the same. And keep me posted. Come back to this video or this post or let me know over email or Facebook or Twitter or something like that. How is it going? Because I have a sneaky suspicion that if we do more of that, things are going to turn out pretty well for us. Boom. One of the fun things about doing this live is I get all these cool people like Johnny Lipsham, who's I think attended all but one of these for the last years and years and years. People like Lakshay in India, Paul Lucas, David Comel, Aaron May, just a lot of cool people here, and I get distracted sometimes when I'm talking because I'm trying to read all your comments as I'm talking, but there's also a delay. I say it, and you hear it about a minute later, and then you respond, so I'm trying to figure out what, like someone just wrote boom. 2 people wrote boom in the chat. I said boom like a minute ago, so that makes for it's just confusing for me. So there you go. Little things you didn't want to know about my life. So this is the part of the podcast and the live stream where I answer your questions. Every Tuesday morning, I try to post a quick post or video saying, hey, there's a Ask Joe happening this afternoon. If you can attend live, here's the link. If you can't, ask your questions below. So I've got a few questions over there, and then I've got folks here live on the actual stream with questions as well. So you've had your chance to think about your question. Maybe my thoughts on failure gave you an idea for a question, or maybe the fact that it sounds like my studio is possessed by some sort of thing that keeps, I don't know if it's in the walls or what. No one's ever going to want to record here again because what is that? You know what? It's just, I'm like shaking my leg and it's shaking the desk and there's something like touching something back there that keeps shaking. I'm a shaky guy. Problem solved. You don't have to worry about the ghosts anymore. Okay. Here's the first question from Mark. Mark says, Joe, how do you feel about mixing as you go? And I think what you're asking, Mark, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're asking if you're recording the project, maybe is it okay to do some of the mixing as you're working on the recording versus being really strict about not doing any mixing until it's officially mixing time. I will say I love to mix as I go. I was saying earlier before we started recording, I like it when I record and mix a project because usually the mixing part goes a lot faster because I'm able to just get the tones that I want in recording, but I'm also experimenting with some EQ compression settings or maybe a different delay or reverb and things like that during the recording session or between sessions as I prep for the next session, things like that. So by the time everything's recorded, it already is somewhat halfway mixed, and then I'm just kind of taking it from there. It can make for a little bit of a challenge if you try something experimental on one session and you don't on another, and so they can start to sound fairly different. You run into those issues, but for me, I would rather keep that session where it is and move forward if I've done a lot of creative mixing stuff in the session. If I haven't, if I've literally just been focused on recording the audio and all I've really done is just set balances, then sometimes if I'm wanting a more consistent thing, I'll export those files out, individual tracks, and I'll import them into a fresh new mix session. That's a little more rare because usually if I've done some things during the mix, I tend to like what I've done. So I could go both ways, but I'm cool with mixing as you go. There's one other thing about that I wanted to say. Oh, the other thing is, so a lot of times we like to try out for me, if it's a new guitar or a new amp or a new pedal or maybe a new plugin, which I don't typically get new plugins. Although yesterday I really wanted there's a impulse response from PreSonus for spring reverbs. I really wanted to grab those yesterday, but instead I ran it through my 11 rack, which has a decent spring reverb, and it sounded fine. But anyway, sometimes a great place to experiment with new plugins is during recording sessions. So if they've recorded their drums and they're coming in to listen back, and you slap that new compressor you got on the drum bus and just tweak around and mess with it, you're getting a feel for it without it being a proper mix session, so the pressure's off a little bit. So things like that can be kind of cool. And you never know, if you use a weird like Sound Toys plugin just goofing around because you're not really mixing, you might do stuff you wouldn't do otherwise, and you might come across a really cool sound. So there you go. Brian says, any chance you can talk about the fader port you've got, what you like, what you don't, things like that? Sure. I'm not good at doing product reviews because I own a fair amount of things. I just don't like product reviews. They bore me. Hey, welcome to the video. I'm going to review this product. I know they're helpful, but this is the fader port. Let me see if I can get it facing upwards like that. If you've not seen, surely you've seen one. They've been around for years. They're pretty old product. They just released the fader port 8, which has 8 faders, which is kind of cool. Things I like about it. Let me just unplug it so it'll reach a little better. The two things I use the most, and this is dirty, like it's gotten a lot of use. I really like the transport controls, so I will use the record button, the stop, and the play buttons, and sometimes the rewind buttons when I'm running a session, when I'm mixing, when I'm recording. A lot of times if I'm doing some vocals, I'll actually just sit or stand here and use this. So I hit record, I'll sing the line. If I don't like it, I'll hit record. It'll stop recording, but keep playing back. I'll hit rewind. It'll rewind the song a few bars, however much I want, and then I can hit record again to punch myself back in. It's a very fast workflow that keeps me from having to actually stop the music, which is kind of fun. Other things I use, there's a pan knob here and the fader here. So obviously I use those a lot. I keep it, man, this fader's kind of wearing out. I keep it right next to my mouse or my trackpad that I use. So I can click on a track, and as soon as I click on it, I can reach over and move the fader to adjust the volume. So I probably do that probably 70% of the time versus clicking the actual fader in the window itself. So that's helpful. It's just nice to just be able to move that and kind of listen with your ears. I use the pan knob some, but it takes a long time to turn it all the way hard left and right, so a lot of times I'll just click through and do that. I don't use the mute and solo buttons up here very much, to be honest, and I don't really use the channel select. I do use the automation buttons to turn touch automation on and off when I'm doing automation. As you know, I don't do a ton of that, but I was doing a mix today where I actually did quite a bit of, of writing the fader, and it turned out kind of nice, and it's nice to have. So for me, I don't think I'm going to get like a fader port 8. I've had like a DigiDesign 003. Remember that one with the 8 faders? It's nice to have those, but I still find myself really just using one at a time anyway. So I've just not gotten into feeling like I'm missing out too much if I don't have more than one fader. I really like it. The other thing that I haven't used it for much in a while, and I know I have a video about this somewhere, is on the back, it's got a foot switch input, which literally you can just plug a momentary foot switch into, so a sustain pedal will work. And it actually, the way I have it set up, you can maybe set it up multiple ways, but the default way is when you step on that pedal, it is essentially the same as pushing the record button. That is super handy for if you're playing a guitar part and you want to punch in one section. And you could go in and set your loop points and then set it up to automatically punch you in and out, but that takes more time. If you just want to keep your hands on the guitar, you can just rewind to well before you need the punch in, start playing along, and then when it's time to record, you just step on that pedal and it starts recording, and then you step on it again and it turns off, or you let your foot off of it and it turns off. I can't remember which one. That's super helpful. Now, I'm sure there are lots of ways to do that without needing the fader port, but it's a cool piece of gear that helps me a little bit with workflow. Do you need it? Can you do everything with a mouse and keyboard? Absolutely. It is nice to have at least one nice fader for moving in volumes and automation and stuff like that. Good question. All right, I'm going to flip over to Facebook and answer a couple of those questions, and I'll come back to you folks in the chat. Andrew says, how do I get background vocals to sit in the mix without disappearing? The biggest thing for me is to route all of the background vocals, whether there's 2 or 10, route them all to a bus and then treat them together. So for me, a lot of times that's EQ. If I sit here and was going to record a bunch of background vocals, oohs and ahs and things like that, or just a big harmony thing, that many vocals is going to have a lot of buildup in the mid-range. That's just going to happen. And that too much mid-range is what makes them feel muddy or weird or awkward or whatever. So by running them all to a single bus, there's no reason to EQ each one individually unless you need to, which usually you don't. I'll run them to a bus, and I'll do usually a wide cut in the low mids and then a boost in the highs if it needs it. That's a very general thing. It depends on the tracks. But that's a good rule of thumb. It allows them to be nice and clear and bright and airy without having a lot of that mid-range that will sit on top of everything else in your mix and cause it to sound muddy. You can also go pretty aggressive on compression on those, which will help them be a little more audible. I'll do that a lot of times as well. David says, howdy. Howdy, David. Says, I know you aren't a gear guru, and I don't want this to be a gear question. More of a theory question. What is your take on the Slate virtual recording studio? Not the gear itself, but the idea of buying one microphone that can mimic the sound of all the dream mics that pro studios use. Also, Slate virtual drums that do essentially the same thing. Is this the easy way out, or is it just a way of complicating a home studio goer's life? So I'll answer both. So for me, drum replacement can be great. I don't personally use it, but I see the appeal. I don't like programming drums, but I could see if I recorded drums and I tried my best, but the recording just didn't come out very well. And there are lots of reasons why that can happen. It's nice to have the option of being able to augment that kind of bad sounding kick drum with a better sounding sample. And that happens all the time. I would venture to say any professionally released song you hear on the radio, whether it's country or pop or rock, has samples in there in addition to the recorded drums. Usually it's not replacing it, it's adding to it. So that's a thing, right? It's being done. Does that make it right or wrong? I don't really care. It's just a useful tool to get the sound that you want. I personally just like the challenge of working with what's given and making it sound its best, which puts more pressure on me if I'm recording or whoever's recording to make sure the recording sounds really good and to get it right at the source, which obviously kind of ties into what I talk about all the time. So that's my thoughts on virtual drums. As far as virtual mics, I've not used the Slate. So if you've seen it, it's a basic mic that you can, it's apparently, I'm guessing, a very clean, clear microphone that you can then use the models inside the box to make it sound more like a U87 or a Bach 251 and all those different, whatever, I don't know which ones they use. And I think he even has them now with the small diaphragm mics, because I saw the booth at NAMM. I didn't really check it out because, again, I wasn't that into the gear stuff. I think what's cool about it is the same reason I like things like the Avid 11 rack. Does it sound exactly like all the amps that it emulates? Probably not, but does it give me lots of different tones? Yes. And that's kind of what I think about those mics. Can they overcomplicate things? Absolutely. But can they, for I'm assuming a fairly reasonable price, give you several different mic tones? That's interesting to me. Like, I would much rather you get something like that than buy a new plugin that's just another EQ or compressor. I feel like you'll get more bang for your buck and more of a difference in tone by going with something on the front end, like a preamp or different microphones or a microphone modeler and things like that. That's kind of where I land on it. I'm more about the front end stuff. Here's a question from Adam Bob. He says, I do audio editing on the side, and I keep getting requests to edit popular songs and mix them together for a cheer routine. I'm guessing like cheerleader dance routine kind of thing. I've declined them all so far. Am I missing out on an opportunity, or am I correct for not doing these? They don't make any money from it. Well, so Adam, I think what you're saying, and I want to say you've maybe asked something similar to this before, is you're saying since it's a copywritten piece of music, are you breaking the law by editing it? And I would say, I'm not a lawyer, but I would say the answer is no. And the people, I mean, my opinion, if the people who are using the music, so if they're going to play that at a pep rally and the music's going to come out the speakers and you've just edited it down, they're responsible for whatever performance royalty things they're supposed to achieve with that. So technically, as a venue, you're supposed to, pay the PROs your annual fee or whatever, and that's what goes towards paying the artists when one of their songs is played in their venues. So that's my really basic, probably rudimentary understanding of it. But as far as you just doing the editing for them, if you clearly have a reason you're not doing it, I don't think there's a moral issue here. Someone's asking you for a service and you're just doing it. And what they do with it is kind of their responsibility. You can say like, hey, I don't know. At the same time, when you read like FBI warnings on like a movie, it says editing or distributing of this thing is illegal. So I don't know, honestly. I would find a copyright lawyer and see what they think. But in my opinion, it's not your responsibility to make sure they do the right thing with the material. I could be wrong. I don't know. Who am I to say? Last Facebook question from Ralph says, question regarding stereo separation with just a piano and vocal recording. I know you dislike duplicating a track and adding delay to one track to produce a, quote, fake stereo effect because it creates phase issues. But what suggestions do you have to create some sonic interest while keeping the vocal panned up the center? If it's a piano vocal recording, I think that's why things like reverbs and delays exist. You can leave the vocal up the middle and have it sounding great, but then you can use a send to send it off to the right to a delay. Or you can send it to two delays, one to the right, one to the left, or a delay that has like a ping pong effect. Reverb will give it some width. I think there's two things here. First of all, yes, you don't want to duplicate it and delay one over the other and try to get something stereo out of it because that's not actually stereo. The other thing is, if the vocal performance isn't enough to hold the person's attention just from the performance, then that's the real issue. You can try a bunch of crazy tricks, but if it's a guitar vocal or a piano vocal song, which is kind of what you're saying, then it needs to be a good performance, and the performance alone should be enough. And then anything you do mixing wise, adding some reverb, adding some delays in certain spots, doing some other kind of effects should only enhance what's there. So I don't know. That's kind of where I would land on it. Okay, I'm back over in the live chat, and there have been a lot of comments since I left, so I'm trying to. Here's from 17 years before, which we need to talk, by the way, offline. I haven't replied to your last email, but anyway, let's talk. It says, hey Joe, when bass is recorded by a line and an amp, there are two different regions, two different pieces of audio. Excuse me. Wait, I'm not understanding your question. Sorry, I don't quite understand your question, amigo. How do you make, this is from Paul Lucas, how do you make recording more fun and less frustrating? That's a good question. Yeah, I think a lot of it is working on music that I think is fun. I think a lot of it is a big chunk of it, and a lot of people don't like this. I like challenges. Literally things like next month I'm going to release an EP. I'm going to record and release an EP in a month. That's challenging, right? I have to plan my time. I have to get in there and make it happen. I have to do things I probably don't want to do and rush myself in the areas that I don't want to rush myself to make it happen. That to me is fun. It puts the fun into it because because you have this limitation of time. You can't get bogged down on stuff that doesn't matter. You kind of have to keep moving. To me, that's fun. For you, maybe you don't like maybe you're doing a lot of stuff alone, maybe bringing other people into the process. It's more work, but maybe it's worth it to have another musician who's playing with you, or someone who produces your music and you're just recording it. I don't know what necessarily the answer is. There's an element of frustrating because making music is work. It will always be work. It will never be completely simple and easy. For example, we promoted a tracking day that I'm doing in March where we sold out 10 slots. We're going to it's me and an electric guitar player who plays fiddle and other things, drums, bass, and keyboards, and we're the session musicians for the day. We're going to record parts for 10 people's songs, 10 songs. And so we'll start around 10 a.m. and it'll probably go into the evening, even though we'll probably be able to do it quickly because we're all good at, picking things up and playing it well. It's just going to be a long day. It's going to be work. And there are moments when I do those types of sessions where I'm like, holy smokes, what am I doing here? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have what it takes. Like, there are moments like that. And there are moments where it's frustrating or it takes longer than it should, or you can't get that one part. And that's just a part of the process, Any advice for working with inexperienced vocalists to help calm nerves and get the best performance? That's a question from Pete. Pete, the best thing is to take all the pressure off. If they know that they're coming in to record and you tell them, hey, if we get the take we need tonight, great. If we have to come back another time and do it again because it takes a while to get used to and comfortable with recording, we'll do that. Depending on personalities, I like to joke around a lot in the studio. A lot of people respond well to that. Some people may not, and you have to kind of play with that. But it really helps loosen them up if you're not so serious. And if they come in really serious and you're kind of goofing around, and you're going to get the job done, but it's very light. I feel like that loosens people up pretty well. Here's one from Kylan. It says, recently recorded for a local band, had a couple issues. One was the musicianship could have been better, and the timing wasn't spot on. This caused a lot of muddiness. How to handle it now? Well, I mean, you can do a lot with editing. So if it's a lot of just timing issues, you can go in and start with the drums, make sure they sound in time with themselves, and then kind of start locking everything else into those drums. You can clean things up quite a bit. However, I don't, when I'm doing a project for people, I don't like to I don't let them assume that I'm going to fix all their mistakes. I'll do things that need to be done, but ultimately, if the performance was bad, it's going to be bad. I can maybe fix some timing here and there, but the real solution is, hey, we're going to do this. It's going to sound like this because of these reasons. Next time, you guys need to rehearse more and rehearse with a metronome and be ready for the session, that kind of thing. Tiki says, how does Joe practice mixing? I like referring to myself in third person. Do you try new techniques and stuff while doing client work? How do you learn new stuff? Good question. I don't know what is happening. Sorry. So for me, I learn new things by, sometimes I learn new things by going to events, like when I went to NAMM, hearing different people talk about mixing and things like that. I learn things when I talk with friends. I learn things here, doing these live things when people are telling me things that they try, kind of everywhere. I don't necessarily, as far as practicing mixing, I do mixing. I make a lot of music myself. Obviously, I'm mixing every month for Dueling Mixes. I'm mixing for clients. It's all practice for me. If I don't have anything lined up client-wise or anything else, then I'm probably making some music, which is part of, releasing 4 EPs this year. I want a lot of music. I want to do a lot of recording, and I want to do a lot of mixing. And that's a great way to make sure I get to do both. Paul says his favorite Joe quote, volume knob controls volume. It's true. It's true. From a video I put out earlier this week. Tomas says, how do you approach full-length album mix? Mix all the songs in one session or separate song sessions? Always separate song sessions. You can save the first song as a template that you can then base the rest of the mixes off of. But you don't want to every song's different, so you need to treat them differently. You may use the same EQ and compression on the drums, but you're probably going to have different levels for vocals. There'll be different instruments depending on the song. Having them all in one session is just a nightmare, especially if you start doing automation. If you need to automate the volume of the vocal in one song, well, now your fader will be stuck in that position for the rest of the songs. Even if you want to move it, you'll have to do it as automation. You're just making it way harder on yourself. So unless it's like a live record where they were all recorded together, even then I'd probably still at least do a save as and have each song be a separate session file. Joe, in your video with Miss Barranco, you mentioned Studio Live. What are you using in your studio? I'm going to wait for the Series 3 for live use. I'm not sure what you're asking. I use the PreSonus Studio Live, which is this mixer right here. 24 channels, PreSonus mixer. Now my camera's all messed up. There we go. I guess that's what you're asking. And Studio One is my software, which is what you see in front of you. Another one from Cam says, I'm tracking mixing my first album. I have stereo XY with the same mics for acoustic guitar in every song. Should I be changing it up from song to song? Don't change things just because you think you should change them. Change them because the mics aren't working for that particular song. It's a very good chance that those same mics will work on every song on the record, or there may be one song where it just isn't working, and so you need to change it. But it's always the answer is use your ears. Marco is here. What's up, Marco? Mark Allen says, in regards to studio frustration, is it ever the case that the gear quality is holding you back at some point? Expensive gear is not necessary, but do you believe it has value in the home studio? I'm not going to say that nice equipment doesn't have value, because it does. I think at some point you can use gear that is so kind of bottom of the barrel quality wise that you're going to have a hard time getting a good recording. As you can see, when you look around my studio, I've got some nice pieces of equipment. I've got some nice guitars. I've got a couple of nice amps. I've got some nice front-end equipment. What I don't have, and you could literally come over here and look on my computer, I don't have any third-party plugins right now, other than like Ian Shepherd's mastering one, which isn't even, it's just metering. And I may have another metering thing that I don't use. But I don't have a Waves bundle. So when I go to mix, that's why I have a lot of front end stuff that I like that has a good sounding quality to it. But then on the back end, if I've recorded it well, I can use basic tools and get a good mix. So somebody messaged me on Facebook today and was saying that I released a song around Christmas that was just an acoustic version of an old Christmas hymn, and it really just had 3 acoustic guitars and a bunch of vocals. And he was asking, I got to know how you got that guitar tone. And so I told him the mics that I used. I used a pair of Earthworks SR25s in XY, and I used my Taylor 314 and I think Open Dadgad tuning, and then I used my Gibson J45. So those are nice, expensive, admittedly expensive guitars that sound really good, but I'm also a good guitar player, and I'm also really good at recording these things. So all of those things contribute. You could use the exact same equipment I did and maybe get a crappy recording if the guitar player's not good. Or you could use really nice mics but have a plastic sounding guitar that's going to sound plastic no matter what kind of mics you throw at it. All those things come into play. So I'm a big fan of upgrading the front end to get better recording sounds. So maybe for you, if you do a lot of electronic music, that means upgrading the samples that you use. Maybe you get better virtual instruments and things like that. Those are fine. They're creative tools. To me, it's the same as buying a keyboard or a guitar or a guitar pedal. I'm just not all about the back end stuff, mixing plugins that, to a lot of them, if it's just an EQ or compressor, I just feel like I can do that already. What do I need that for? But that doesn't mean you're wrong if you do. And there's times where I'm thinking, man, I'd like to change things up, which again, that can be a good reason to get a new piece of equipment or a new plug-in bundle or something. If you're getting bored with what you're using and you want to change things up, that's also legit. There's nothing wrong with that. Andrew says, upgraded from Studio One artist to professional. Any tips for getting the most out of my DAW? New features I may not be aware of. No, if you haven't watched my Studio One videos, there's 100 of them. They're a little bit older. They're version 2 mostly, but a lot of those features are still applied. The times I learn about new features is watching somebody else use it and picking up some things. So watching my videos, you'll pick up things. Watching those Studio One videos specifically, you'll pick up things as well. Tim Morgan says, hey Joe, any quick tips for recording and mixing a cappella numbers? I'm thinking more of a pentatonics type feel than a traditional choral. Tim, I've done very little a cappella, and I think it's the only a cappella I've done has been me singing. So you need obviously a good signal chain, you need a good mic, you need a good sounding room. A quiet room would be helpful, because one vocal in a rock mix, if there's some room sound, you can probably deal with it. But 20 vocals with nothing to hide behind, suddenly the vocal chain needs to be really good. You'll hear the extra room in the mic and things like that. So that's probably where I would start. Obviously, all those things get pretty heavily tuned, auto-tuned, Melodyne, things like that. You should check out my buddy Danny Osmond. He does a lot of acapella production. What's his Emerald City Productions or something like that? I did a tour of his studio. Check it out on my YouTube. You can find links to his page. I think he talks a little bit about acapella stuff too. And there are very specific ways that acapella folks go about recording and editing and mixing. I'm just not one of them, so I can't really speak to it. Tim says, would you approach mixing samples such as drum samples in the same way you would mix acoustic drums, or do you approach the sample drums differently because they're already processed? I approach everything the same. Knowing that it's a sample is helpful information, so I know that it probably already sounds pretty close to how it needs to sound, but I could also tell that by just listening. If I listen and say, oh, that's the kick drum sound I want, well, guess what? I don't have to do much because it already sounds like I want it to sound. It kind of gets back to that idea. I see a theme today of, should I do this because of these kind of reasons that don't make sense? Not reasons that don't make sense, but there was the question earlier about, should I change microphones? Because I have this idea that I need to change it to keep it different. You should only change things and do things based on what you hear. It's the theme for today. Same thing with mixing drums. If I get drums from a client and it sounds amazing, I may not even know that they're samples or not, so I still have to listen. But if I run them to a drum bus, do a little bit of EQ, maybe a little compression, and it sounds amazing, guess what? I'm not going to go do the 8 other things I like to do to a snare drum most of the time, because I only do them because I hear that it needs it. Does that make sense? So you have to get to a point where you're hearing things and saying, this is the sound that I want, or this isn't the sound that I want. If it is, then leave it alone. If it isn't, then figure out what the next step is to get it to sound more like the sound that you want. Good questions, though. How important is bit and sample rate while tracking? Not really at all. Just record at 24-bit. I record everything at 44.1. It is not going to be the reason your recordings and mixes sound either amazing or bad. There are a lot of other factors at play, which we've talked about a million times. 8E8 Studio says, I've been recording and mixing for 5 years now, but still find it hard to find clients or artists wanting to record. How do I get more clients? You know, that's the $1 million question for everyone in every industry in the history of mankind. So I don't know. It's going to be different for you than it is for me. One great thing that you can do is reverse engineer. Think about your last 10 clients you worked with. And think about, literally go back and see, how did I get that gig? And you'll probably see a theme. I imagine they're people that you know, people that you had relationships with, people that knew your work and really enjoyed your work and then eventually came to work with you. I imagine there may be some that just randomly find you on Google or, find your Craigslist post and say, hey, you sound like a great guy. I want to work with you. That can happen. But in my experience, and I imagine in most people's experience, that is the exception and not the norm. So I don't know, what kind of music you're working on, what kind of clients you're working with, what kind of area you live in. But I would go back and look at, if you have paid clients and you've worked with them before, or even free clients, how did those relationships, how did those jobs come to pass? And then go back and do more of that. That's what I would do. And then you can also try new things like getting into new groups, going to events, meeting new people, offering to work with people who are also working with the types of clients you work with, all that kind of stuff. Hey Joe, have you ever used VSL with Studio One? I haven't, because it stopped working on the latest update of Mac or something. So I used it slightly on my Audio Box 44 VSL, and then it's not supported anymore. So no, I didn't use it much. Mark, final question. When you mix your own song versus hire out to mix someone, whose aesthetic that inspires you? So who would inspire me if I was going to hire that out? I mean, I'm really good friends with Graham Cochran, and I like the stuff that he does. Dueling mixes that we do together, I almost always like his mix. I usually like mine better, but he's somebody I respect musically. I'm out of time. Gotta go. See ya.